Hello, everybody. I'm Dan Limbach, producer of the PharmaVOICE webcast network, and I'll be your off-camera facilitator for today's event. Welcome to PharmaVOICE 2021 DIA Super Panel, a tech-enabled future. We have a great crowd today with executives and professionals from across the life sciences industry. Thank you for investing the time to attend. We are looking forward to a lively discussion and lots of audience participation. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of the Zoom technology platform. If you can hear me but are experiencing problems seeing the slides or the panelists, you may want to try logging in using a different browser. Zoom recommends using the latest version of Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and Microsoft Edge. You can also join using the Zoom mobile app on a smartphone or tablet. For any other technical issues, visit support.zoom.us/HC. Please set your control panel to gallery view so you can see all the panelists on the screen at the same time when we start the panel discussion. We are taking questions from the audience today, and you can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the event using your Zoom Q&A tool. When you submit a question for the Q&A, if you would like a specific panelist to respond, please type their name at the beginning of the question. If you would like anyone on the panel to respond, do not specify a name. We will have several audience polls during the event, so get ready to share your opinions and experiences with us, and we'll compare your results with the panel's results. You can also use the Zoom chat tool to live stream your comments and share your insights with the panelists and other attendees. This has proven to be a popular feature in past panels, so don't hesitate to jump right in and share your thoughts. We are recording this event, and we will send you a link to the recording in about 1 to 2 business days so you can review the event at your leisure. Now that we're through with the housekeeping details, let's dive into the program. Our panel is loaded with some of the most respected executives in the life sciences, and we are beyond excited to bring them all together today. So let's meet our esteemed panelists. Aaron Berger, VP, RWE, UBC. Rob Bohacs, CEO, ClinOne. Ronan Brown, Global Head of IQVIA Decentralized Trials, IQVIA. Dr. Clare Grace, Chief Patient Officer, Parexel. Wendy Kanna, Head of Global IT Security Governance and Oversight, Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Suresh Katta, Founder and CEO, Saama Technologies. Matt Lasmanis, Chief Technology and Information Officer, Sage Therapeutics. Caroline Redeker, SVP of Corporate Development, Advanced Clinical. John Siener, EVP, Product and Marketing, Real Chemistry. Dr. Peter Steiger, Chief Scientific Officer, Calyx. Kent Tolke, Chief Scientific Officer, PRA Health Sciences. And Dr. Sujata Vaidyanathan, Global Drug Development Unit Head, Global Health, Novartis Pharmaceuticals. Taren Grom, co-founder and editor-in-chief of PharmaVOICE, will be moderating the discussion today. Taren, take it away. And unmute yourself, please.
Can't believe I started off with a rookie mistake. So thanks so much, Dan, and thanks to everyone for joining us for our panel today. We are going to be covering a lot of territory over the next 90 minutes. We will have 6 questions related to a tech-enabled future and a final rapid round to hear our panelists' predictions for the future. We believe a tech-enabled future, from decentralized clinical trials to AI-enabled drug discovery, will forever change the clinical and R&D landscape, and all stakeholders need to be positioned to adapt to a future that requires agility, collaboration, and transformation. To keep things interesting, we are meshing a little old school with a little new school. The audience in the panel will be answering the same set of questions. For the audience, Dan will launch a poll for each question. These same questions have been answered in advance by our super panelists. After each poll closes, our panelists will be asked to hold up their answer to the question. This is where the old school comes in. We look forward to seeing how the answers shake out, where there is alignment and where there are differing opinions. For each question, a few of our panelists will provide their insights on the topic. We expect this format to provide a lively discussion. Speaking of which, at the end of the questions, as Dan noted, we will open up the program to allow panelists to interact with one another and you, our audience. We will be tracking your questions during the program and will do our best to answer as many as we can as the time allows. We also encourage you, as Dan said, to use the chat function to engage with the panel as well as with each other. So Dan, let's kick it off. Let's get started with question number 1.
Okay, let's get that poll up on the screen. And the first question is technology transformation in progress. If you could only choose one, which area will technology have the biggest impact on? Site operations, R&D, clinical trials, or patients? And the results are already coming in, so we'll give everyone another moment to let us know what they think. Okay, let's say last call and close the poll, and then let's look at the results here. So looks like clinical trials and patients are in the lead at 40%.
Well, let's see what our super panelists have to say. Super panelists, show us your answers. Excellent. We saw that too, that the majority of our panelists responded with either clinical trials or patients, with Suresh stating R&D. So Suresh, let's start with you. Why do you believe R&D will be mostly impacted or have the biggest impact by technology?
Thank you, Taren. Appreciate it. Look, looks like I'm in a little minority here, but I'll go ahead and state my opinion here. Look, R&D is for me an umbrella for all the other 3 answers you had there. Being a technologist, let me say that since technology came into play major way about 5 decades back, every industry vertical has been leveraging it effectively, but pharma is one of them lagging behind. And I feel there is a need for a different mindset, need to think of technology as part of a R&D process, not separate from it. The industry has taken a stand and taking a lot of risks on the science side, but not necessarily on the technology side. Over the past decade, there has been an extreme amount of innovation that has happened with technology and data, exponential data growth that has happened both on drug discovery side and on development side. And still, as you all know, there's a large gap exists between R and D today. They not necessarily even talk to each other quite well. And there is a need for building a bridge. Last point I would like to make is technology has to streamline quite a few manual processes that exist in the R&D today, making data share efficiently and effectively, and that can lead to streamlining entire process as well as transformation of the drug R&D processes, continuum itself. That's kind of my answer, Taren.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Suresh. So we really need to think about taking a little bit more risk with our technology to keep up with the science. Yeah. Excellent. So now I'd like to move on to Wendy, who's joining us from Japan. And she responded that patients will be the biggest beneficiary of technology. Wendy, thanks for joining us from the middle of your night.
No worries. Thank you, Taren. So yes, for me, technology transformation has the biggest impact on patients. It goes back and aligned to our Takeda's priorities. In everything that we make decisions and take actions, by focusing on the following priorities in this order: putting the patient at the center, building trust with society, reinforcing our reputation, developing the business. Along with these priorities, Takeda's values is built on Takedaism: integrity, fairness, honesty, and perseverance. These two, Takedaism and our priorities, guide us in our efforts to achieve our vision, established by our founding spirit and integral in every part of our business. That's my answer, Taren. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, very much. Appreciate that. Now let's move on to Matt. You also identified patients. Tell us why.
Sure. So I think what we've seen in the industry over the last decade or two is a general kind of consumerization trend in healthcare, meaning that people are starting to want the same types of digital products, digital experiences that they're used to in their personal life. Well, they want that from their health life as well. And we've seen that shift accelerated over the last year with COVID as a catalyst towards that acceleration, right? And I think if you sort of play out over the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see some of those products and services become normative in the industry, right? And if you think about that macro shift, that consumerization oriented shift is inherently a patient-centric shift at the macro level. So that's why I said patients for this one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Caroline, let's move on to you. You noted clinical trials as the area that will be impacted the most.
Yes, Taren, I think the patients definitely, but then all the people that are in the clinical trial process and how they have to accommodate what we're doing to get to those patients and to change their experience. So up until maybe the last 2 years, it's really been technology has enabled us to do things the way that we've always done it, just a little bit better. And now technology is enabling us to think differently. And I think that we're going to see that in the way that we all have to work for clinical trials. So we'll have to think differently about how we're designing protocols and looking at data. We're going to have to think differently about how we work with sites and what our expectations are of them and how we pay them. There's a lot of different things that factor into this. And I think that's why I answered clinical trials, because I think all of the parties are really going to be affected.
It's Caroline, it's not just about thinking differently too, it's about acting differently, right? And changing the framework.
Exactly.
Excellent. John, round us out on this topic. You can tell us why clinical trials will be the biggest beneficiary of technology, please.
Well, I think we've reached a point where technology has allowed us to be able to discover, engage, and activate medically eligible patients for trial, right? It's the key to this all. How do I minimize dropout? How do I enroll patients that are going to stick with a clinical trial? And you look at kind of the artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of aspects that are out there. I've now reached a point where without a diagnostic code, without previous prescriptions that have been written for a patient, I can now locate rare disease patients, right? That may not even know that they've got the disease. I can locate them. I can locate their HCPs, right? The treating healthcare provider. I can allow them to understand the mechanisms of disease intercept. And then furthermore, how do I enroll that patient in a clinical trial with something that maybe only affects 4,000 people, right? So I've got that end. Technology also allows us to incorporate new types of data sets as well. So you think of a conventional clinical trial, now for the first time, I can use pattern of life analysis. I can use social determinants of health. I can see if folks are going to have economic hardship with enrolling in a trial. And now I can understand, how do I activate them? How do I engage them? We've even seen technologies that we've been developing where we're able to, in a sense, create new pathways of health equity, right? Because now I can assure a diverse patient population with trials by incorporating some of these real world data sets and using artificial intelligence and machine learning to the best of their augmented intelligence ability.
Those are great points. Thank you so much, John. I think it's really interesting as we look at all the different aspects of this. It all revolves around the patient in some way or another, but it's using technology in its best possible way to enhance the process and make it more streamlined for patients to participate in drug development and clinical trial processes. So thank you so much for your insights, all of you. Dan, we are ready for question number 2, if you don't mind. Launch
Absolutely.
2, please.
And it's interesting that we're already talking a lot about patients because our next topic is related, our next question is related to patients. How will technology advancements best benefit patients participating in clinical trials? So we'll just ask the audience to give us their opinion.
How we doing, Dan?
Just give everyone one more moment and let's say last call and let's see what the results are. So 72% alleviate participation burden with time, travel, etc. That's probably not very surprising.
Nope, it's not surprising, but let's see what our super panelists have to say about it. See, the majority are in Yes, exactly. And as we know, participating in clinical trials is a burden for patients. And any way that we as an industry can alleviate that burden, so much the better. So let's get started with our panel. And I'm going to kick off with you, Claire, since you are all about the patient.
Indeed. And, I'm going to be quite controversial with this one, Taren, and say, actually, I don't think the main one was listed. And that for me is technology that harnesses data to ensure that we can develop more synthetic control arms. That has to be the ultimate way that we reduce patient burden. But in terms of to keep within the bounds of the question, I definitely think it is in reducing burden. Ultimately, I think technology can increase flexibility and reduce burden. And if you look at the things like the opportunity for including telehealth visits or using clinical grade sensors in order to capture data that might otherwise be done as a procedure in a site face to face, you can see there that would help patients enormously in being flexible to fit around schedules and time, etc. So I think that's a really clear piece. But I think one thing that I do want to stress is that it's really important, in fact critical, that as we bring in new technologies, we support patients and sites effectively with those technologies. So patients have suitable and effective support systems for managing that technology, and it's not just laid onto the site role because they are not experts in technology support. And then also it's really important that as we do decentralize and we gather data from various sources, physicians have really good, actionable, analytical dashboards to see the outliers, to see the trends, and to ensure that we're not putting more burden on sites and investigators to sift through data, to go into EDC systems and things like that. So I think it, definitely has a lot of technology, definitely has a huge capacity to reduce burden on patients and sites.
Thanks, Claire. And that wasn't controversial at all. I just didn't have a spot to do 15 drop downs for everything in there. So Rob, I'll turn to you now. As you also noted in the technology can play a role in alleviating the burden on patients.
Yeah, of course, and thank you so much. Certainly resonate what Claire had to say as well, but it starts very early on in the clinical trial journey, to be honest, right? If you have a patient that's living somewhere in the LA region or San Francisco or Boston, they're going to have to communicate with a half a dozen major institutions and navigate their clinical trial hotlines just to get information about what clinical trials even exist. So I'm going a little bit further upstream here. And if we can really make sure that patients understand what a clinical trial entails, what's visible around their site in terms of options, and then going through the screening process potentially remotely so they can see what they qualify for more rapidly is a critical part of that step. And then, of course, resonating with some of the technologies on delivering that care at home for patients or near home for patients is really critical. We look at clinical trials, and where we select our clinical trial sites, they're typically designated in major metropolitan areas. So it really mitigates the option for patients who are in rural or underserved, underprivileged populations to participate in trials because they just don't live within the vicinity, for example. So I think thinking about it upstream early on and getting patients enrolled and then the trial experience where they can do so remotely is absolutely critical. Right? Everything that we can do to lift that burden off the patient, for example, is an important part of making sure they have a successful trial experience. And even a burden where managing the tasks, managing daily reminders for medications, right? Integrating that information with sensors and clinical endpoints at home, all that would help bring down the challenges the patient sees. And again, if we're talking about rural patients and underserved privileges, then transportation becomes a challenge even by itself, for example. So I think it's really looking at every single study in general, understanding how we chip away and how that impacts the population within that given study so that we can open up and reduce that burden for patients is absolutely critical. I think we'll see an increase in enrollment of patients, more successful completion and compliance of patient, and then of course, the ability to retain those patients for extended durations.
Excellent points, Rob. Thank you so much. I think you're seeing that we're seeing this theme of how technology is touching every aspect of it. And it may not be all in for every trial, but certainly there are technology components for every trial that are appropriate. Kent, let's get you into the conversation. I know this is a topic that is a particular passion to you. So tell me why you believe that it's going to alleviate the patient burden.
Yeah, I mean, I think, combining everything that everybody said, Suresh is absolutely right. We've been doing this for 40 years for modern clinical trials and are almost doing things the same way we did 40 years ago. I think that, the biggest advancement we had in 40 years was moving from paper to EDC. Meanwhile, technology just surpassed us in every part of our life. And so, when we think about patients, what COVID showed us is that this isn't really just theory anymore, that it actually does work. And so for many of the COVID trials, for many of the fully decentralized trials, and I'm sure Ronan has experience here, we have seen metrics that far exceed any of our traditional trial models. So recruitment rates at 10x, 20x, what we see in traditional models, diversity at 30, 40%. So the outputs are real. And I think to Claire's point, when we think about the patient burden, we are running breast cancer trials today with the same control populations we have run for 20 years. We know everything about first-line breast cancer from a control arm perspective, and yet we still waste 50% of these patients going through standard of care when we know there could be a better option. So there's all of these things that intersect. I think that what we're seeing is both a technology piece, but also generational, right? Millennials are the largest generation in history. Millennials grew up in a digital technology age. And I think to Matt's point, their consumerism is they expect their healthcare to be delivered in this model. And so if clinical trials and clinical development don't anticipate that and match that, there won't be people that want to participate in research. And so there's all of these kind of diverse pieces that are intersecting. I think that as we think about how that consumerism and trials match and start to come together, this isn't a matter of if you want to, it's really a matter of survival for drug development. And I know this super panel has all great people and we're all innovative. The frustrating part for me probably, and to Claire's point, not to be controversial, but as much as we all believe this, the sponsor companies who have to actually put their money where their mouths are and talk about, to Wendy's point, patients are centric. Every day I have conversations about redoing protocols and optimizing them to meet the patient where they are. And to John's point, we've done this in orphan diseases for a really long time. But for standard diseases, when the majority of patients live an hour or 2 or 3 hours away from a major metropolitan tertiary medical center, asking them to participate in research in our current protocol model, that burden is just too high, which means clinical research is not a care option for most patients. And so until we can get the other 95% of people within development arms of pharma and biotech to adopt these things and let's talk about how great they are, we're not going to move anywhere close to where we need to. So, I think these panels are fantastic. I think we have to create more and more evangelists. I think we hear the same thing all the time. I'm sure, Ronan, you hear it at IQVIA on the DCT side. Prove it to me. Prove it works. Prove it's not going to be more expensive. Prove it's more efficient. And so they're kind of at odds. Are we trying to prove it's more efficient and more cost effective? Or are we trying to prove that we can get more new drugs to patients? And so, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And again, not to be controversial, but I'm not short of shaming a lot of people in the development arms of pharma companies who talk a big game around patient centricity and then roll out protocols that are the same ones they had 5 years ago with 4,000 endpoints and 20 visits. It just, okay, I'm gonna take a breath. It's maddening. So anyways, there you go.
We're going to hear from a couple of our pharma folks right now. So hopefully they can espouse your concerns here a little bit. Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you have some thoughts on this and you think about it as really being able to reach a more diverse patient population.
Yes, Taren. So yeah, technology advancement increased diversity of subpopulations. This is the promise of decentralization and hybrid trials. And this is where life science industries are looking to have most achievements. Diversity and inclusion, and as John mentioned earlier, less patient dropout rates. When we thoughtfully engage diverse populations in our clinical trials, we generate evidence that better reflects the patients and patient subgroups most likely to use a medicine if approved, giving everyone more accurate data and insights to inform regulatory submissions, future trials, and for approved treatments, potentially more efficacious and safer utilization. Enhancing diversity in clinical trials is simply the right thing to do.
Thank you, Wendy. And Sujata, we're going to get you into this conversation now too, because I know you have a little bit of a different perspective on it.
Thank you. Thanks, Taren. And, I think I had one of those other 15 options from your drop-down menu. So I said, flexibility and engagement with patients as my response. And, as Ken said, One trend we've seen coming out of the COVID-19 is the rise of patient as a consumer. And that means that as an industry, we need to provide more flexible trial engagement options that better suit their needs. We can't be doing what we did in the past, you know? Technology advancements have helped us create more flexibility, really embedding virtual solutions such as remote monitoring, bringing the trial to the patient with options like home nursing or home delivery, and really exploring direct to patient recruitment. And if we don't, go with the trend, then we're going to be left behind. These increased options have also enabled us to reach and engage with patients who may traditionally not have participated in a clinical trial, like including historically underserved and underrepresented patient population. So really with the advancements in technology, we actually have the opportunity to not just increase the diversity in trial participation, but also to ensure that these advancements reflect the standards used for clinical diagnosis, trial endpoints, policy, and all of that. So this actually ensures that the data gathered supports healthcare providers, patients, and their caregivers in making more informed decisions regarding current and future treatments. Ultimately, it'll end up improving the quality of care every patient receives. Taren?
Yep, Sujata, thank you so much. And to round out what Kent was saying, while somewhat controversial, it is also important for everybody to become an evangelist for this movement, because as you say, 40 years and we're still doing the same old thing. We need to think better and think differently. And that goes back to what Carolyn said earlier. It's not just think differently, but act differently as well. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer to steer those bigger ships. But if we're all moving in the right direction, and I hope, Kent, that you do see that we are moving in the right direction, that we're not going backwards, and that some of this movement coming out of COVID is going to be sustainable as we look to the future. So if there's a silver lining coming out of anywhere out of COVID, it is that we're looking differently and we're acting differently, we're thinking differently. So thank you all so much. That was great. Dan, let's move to question number 3. And one of the hot topics of the moment, Kent, you touched on it a little earlier, decentralized clinical trials. It's all the talk.
That's right, Taren. So decentralized clinical trials, DCTs are all the rage. What percentage of your clinical programs are incorporating at least one aspect of a hybrid or virtual trial? Is it 100 to 75%, 74 to 50%, 49 to 25%, or 24 to 0%? They're coming in at a good clip, so we'll give everyone a moment. And let's say last call and close the poll and see the results. So the winner here is 24 to 0%.
Oh, that's a little bit surprising, but okay. Let's see what our super panelists have to say. 100%. Oh my gosh, there's several of you out there. That's amazing. So obviously you can see that we have a wide variety of the answers among our group, which I guess isn't so surprising considering where we are in the state of the industry. Ronan, let's get you into the conversation. You noted that you were seeing between 1/4 and 1/2 of clinical trials being somewhat DCT or in a hybrid in nature. Tell us about your experience.
I think it was actually in the question that you asked was one element, and I think it comes down to the definition that you use here, because, and I'll get to our definition in a minute, but we have been running studies for the last 7-8 years with e-consent. So if you just took e-consent as your one parameter for, is it a decentralized study? We've done over 1,000 studies in that space.
Okay.
If you took risk-based monitoring, which other companies use as a definition, 75% of our studies have risk-based monitoring or an element of risk-based monitoring. So one element doesn't really make it. And we have this debate internally about what is a decentralized study? And one of those elements does not make it a decentralized study.
Fair.
Where we've tried to use a more kind of concrete definition, it's where there's a technology that links patients, sites, and study teams. By that definition, only 10% of our studies are in that, you use that definition at the moment. So and again, it's a debate that the whole industry is having at the moment about what is it. But I really do think it is that underpinning technology platform that links both the patients, the sites, and really enables the data flow that comes from multiple different sources and aggregates it and collects it That is what a decentralized study looks like. And we use that from, I think to expand our global reach, to get to patients you couldn't do, to collect information that you wouldn't have done previously. And I think it was funny talking to a couple of pharma companies last week when you say, how do you define how you're going to use a decentralized approach? And it is really, now looking at what kind of study would you not be able to do unless you decentralized it? Ones where you have 25 visits over 25 weeks, most patients are not going to sign up for that. So it's really about thinking about what you could not do previously that decentralization now enables.
I love that. It's what you couldn't do and rather what you can do. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. What studies wouldn't be open to a DCT approach? Rob, you are also in the middle of the road. Tell us about what you're seeing.
Yeah, of course. Great question. It tends to be a little bit indication specific, right? So in our oncology trials, if we can help mitigate or eliminate one visit, for example, does that count as a hybrid trial potentially, right? Any technology that allows us to have an improved experience remotely for the patient and being able to mitigate some of the challenges around a visit, that qualifies as the bar being set a little bit low for hybrid trials. And I think we're at an exciting point where our sponsors are willing to try new technologies, looking at how they actually design their studies to mitigate some of those visits, or even designing studies from early stages where remote visits are a part of the actual protocol from version 1 is very exciting for us as well. And being able to incorporate some of the technologies that we're seeing emergent in terms of at-home wearables, digital endpoints, and making sure that there is a technology platform that can support that is a hurdle for a lot of sponsors to overcome, right? I think there's a lot of companies out there that are still working on a solution that can meet those needs. But today, I think we see about 25, maybe 30% of our trials having some incorporated hybrid function. A few of our trials that we're managing today are really fully decentralized. And those are going to be easier trials, right? Those are going to be studies that are have low risk for the patients, the ability to participate remotely with minimal challenges in terms of clinical supplies, logistics, any kind of management of their wearable devices, and that's easy. I would like for our sponsors to push forward and incorporate this into more studies, but it's still very early on. I think we'll see this emerge over time because it's going to take several things to align to have a fully decentralized or a consistent hybrid approach. That's going to be having the appropriate products around the world, having the appropriate technologies around the world, as well as any kind of availability to wearables, which we know is still a maturing market, a study that can afford to have the ability to run a hybrid or decentralized trial model, and then of course a sponsor that's willing to continue to build on those programs in their portfolio as well. So adoption is still pretty low. Again, probably 25 to 30% to be realistic. And again, even though they're just hitting some of the basic definitions of a hybrid trial, very small number of trials that are fully decentralized today.
Thank you, Rob. I think you and Ronan both bring up a good point. It's what pieces of the decentralized clinical trial process are we talking about? You talk about wholly decentralized versus something like an e-consent and plus another technology. It's the weaving of it all the way through that is going to be critical. So Caroline, I know you're seeing an uptick.
Yes.
What's happening in your DCT world?
Yeah, we've seen quite an uptick, but again, it's in components, as the panel has mentioned. We've seen a big increase in the thirst for it from our sponsors. We spend a lot of time talking about, the prove it, as Kent said, right? Can you tell us which things you've used, how have they worked, has the FDA accepted it? There's all kinds of dialogue that happens with sponsors so that they understand they're learning. And meanwhile, there's vendors popping up, I think, quicker than I've ever seen in 30 years. That all of a sudden now there are maybe probably 5 calls a day I get from technology providers wanting us to look at something. And so there's really, and they all have different pros and cons. And so everybody's learning now what are all the different systems. And I think the sponsors are trying to make educated decisions on the best thing, but what's the perfect and how long will it take for them to feel comfortable with the perfect is the question. And so we are implementing these. We don't see a lot of virtual trials. It's more components of trials. and then incorporating home visits and technologies around that and the actual home visits. And so we see that again, like I think it was Rob who said, is very indication specific. The rare disease, different indications that require it. So that's kind of how we're seeing it today. And then also, I think just the last thing is now we have an organization that's focused on decentralized trials that have hit the market. And so there are a lot of companies now where we're going to be defining a lot of those things. What is a decentralized trial? What's the glossary? How does it work? And so, I think over the next 6 months, we'll see a lot more from that end of things.
Excellent, Caroline. Thank you so much. I do think you're right. I think there's some still market confusion as to what is a decentralized clinical trial. Everybody on this panel, I bet, can define it differently. And that's just, a handful of us. Imagine what it's like industry-wide, right there. But there's so much euphoria out there around DCTs, almost as much as there was EDC 15 years ago. So we're going to see what happens. I think you're right. Next 6 months to 12 months is going to be very telling. Claire, you said 100%. So, okay.
Well, I actually said 75 to 100.
I apologize.
So we're seeing 80% of our studies having a one or more component, which I think is very consistent with what Ronan said, Rob, etc. It is the norm now, and honestly has been for a while. I think COVID did accelerate some of those areas, but absolutely the hybrid trial is here. It's the norm, and it's what we're all conducting every day. Fully decentralized trials are a different matter. There is demand for them, but as Caroline said, it's still a very niche area, in all honesty. I don't ever think we're going to see a cell and gene therapy trial dropship therapy to a patient, let's be honest. And that's becoming an incredibly big part of the oncology portfolio, which is an incredibly big part of the industry pipeline. So we need to remember that there are certain indications where decentralization is a lot more difficult. I think the big thing for me is it's not an either or, it's about flexibility for the patient, and the patient may choose to go to a site 1 week and not the next, and we should not be pressurizing a patient or a site into a certain technology or a certain structure. We need to give flexibility. We need to ensure that we can give patients choice. I think in all honesty, too much of the time we think of patients as patients, and we should be thinking of them as people. And that sounds strange to come from a chief patient officer, but fundamentally, we are people who have complex and busy lives. Studies are not getting any less complex, as Kent said earlier. They're just as difficult as they always were, if not more so. And the research infrastructure globally is not expanding. We are still at the same number of physicians who are running studies. We have a worldwide shortage of CRAs, and it's well known that the research infrastructure globally is quite static in its growth. So we have to find a way of moving through this very small funnel of research infrastructure, what is an incredibly healthy pipeline, and what is even more healthy now with COVID and long COVID assets coming into that play as well. So we have to offer flexibility for patients and sites, and we have to make sure that we are able to attract more people into research as well. So yes, we do see 80%. It is the norm, and I think it will continue that way.
That's great. And, I hope we get to a point at some time, not too distant future, where we stop calling them decentralized clinical trials and they're just clinical trials, right? The nomenclature changes and the technology has all been adopted, and pieces of those trials are now providing that flexibility that patients need. So fantastic. Thank you all so very much for your insights on this. And it took DCTs really to push artificial intelligence and machine learning to the next, just one rung below what everybody is talking about, right? So can we launch poll number 4, please?
And that actually marks halfway through the audience polling questions. So we've still got a lot more to go through, and the discussion has been great so far. This is about AI and machine learning. Can AI and machine learning live up to the hype in transforming clinical operations? Yes, no, or maybe?
Dan, what are you seeing?
I'm seeing a lot of stuff coming in. Not too much on the no. So at least maybe and yes are kind of neck and neck. So as you can see in the results, it's a virtual tie for yes versus maybe.
Yeah, and I really debated putting that maybe in there because it allowed people to hedge their bets. And I thought, well, we'll give some folks an out. But I think, as we look to the future, AI and machine learning really do have a place in our world. So let's get in there and talk about and see what our super panelists have to say and if their responses are matched with our audience. So super panelists, we have a mixed bag here. We have a lot of yeses and we have some maybes. So excellent. So Peter, thank you for being patient and welcome to the conversation. We're going to get you to jump in here and please share why you responded the way you did.
So thanks for giving me the out and putting the maybe in there, because there's absolutely no question that AI will have a big impact on clinical trials, and it really already has. But you used the word hype. And hype often suggests that any and all vexing problems besetting clinical trials will have an AI answer, and that is highly unlikely. John pointed out in one of his early questions that there have been great areas of progress. We are using speech recognition, natural language processing, applying it to curating clinical data, which really has provided an enabling functionality for real-world evidence trials. We're finding patients with rare diseases and using that kind of technology in all kinds of innovative ways. The nice thing too is that really is a clinical operationals aspect of artificial intelligence and has, as a result, produced results very quickly. However, there are other areas of great promise where progress has been at best tentative. And one such example involves replacing human readers for the interpretation of biomarker data. Medical imaging is a particular area of interest there. Well, why is that? So developing AI-based methods requires iterative cycles of training and testing. And to do so, we depend on curated data sets representing an accepted ground truth. These data sets often represent rather narrow problems that prevent the broad generalization of the resulting method. That becomes particularly important when we are using approaches that have been tested by human raters over decades of clinical research. And the regulatory institutions are rather conservative in accepting other methodologies and grading schemes that might be better suited to machine learning as surrogates. I'll give you a very simple example. To develop a method to eliminate personal health information that is burnt into medical imaging, or finding personal health information in private DICOM tags. Many different organizations have tried their hand at solving this problem, and we have tested many, including our own, and have yet to find one that is reliable across the wide variety of images we receive. On the other hand, though, to cite a positive example, in collaboration with academic colleagues at National Jewish Health, we have employed machine learning-based methods to quantify structural changes on high-resolution computed tomography images to assess pulmonary fibrosis, which traditionally has been a task that is very difficult for human readers to perform, but better suited for a machine algorithm. So in my opinion, in conclusion, AI is absolutely here to stay and has already made valuable contributions, but we need to be realistic about its capabilities and must be patient for it to reach its full potential.
That was an awesome maybe. I think that's exactly so well done. So Aaron, I want to welcome you to the program as well. You said yes, that also that AI has some pretty good potential.
Yeah, and I'll qualify that as well, just kind of like Peter did. As with a lot of the modernization and adaptation of new technologies or approaches in our industry, the hype cycle is often ahead of reality, and it takes the reality to catch up a little bit. This was the case when I think back to the migration from paper-based data collection to EDCs. And we were probably asking the same question about 20 years ago in the beginning. Will web-based data capture live up to the hype? And the answer was yes, but we were still using paper for a number of years until we were fully migrated into EDCs. And the same will be true with AI. So AI and machine learning and NLP. And actually, I call it MLP, medical language processing, because the medical language that we need to interpret is far different from natural language that some of the off-the-shelf applications can help you interpret. But a couple of specific areas where it's already emerged or will be emerging: pharmacovigilance. We already see some real progress there in enhancing those workflows, generating narratives, this is an area that's ripe for AI because of the high volumes of work. The more data we feed into the algorithms, and the more the algorithms learn, the better we can get at case processing, and we can really solve a problem of these astronomical, volumes of cases that need to be processed, and we can use AI to do that. A second area that we've already seen it in clinical operations, more to the point of the question, is in the way we monitor data and do targeted SDV, risk-based monitoring, RBQM. We can apply those methodologies there and get more efficient with the way we identify potential problems with the data, and in fact monitor less data, solve that CRA crunch that we heard a panelist earlier talk about. And then a third area that has emerged, but maybe not as common, and Peter alluded to this a little bit, is I call this deep phenotyping, and using MLP to explore the unstructured field. So up to this point, we've done a lot of work in real-world evidence defining cohorts of patients that we want to study using structured fields, ICD-10 codes, and secondary data, including lab data, claims data, medical claims data. But the future is going to lie in also exploring what's in the source notes. And we need AI to do that, and MLP to do that. And this is going to allow us to parse out very specific patient populations that we want to study to answer a given research question, going beyond what's simply in, because there's certain patient populations we just can't find in the structured fields. So that's kind of the next frontier that we see AI and MLP really yielding value in research.
Taren, thanks so much. And I love that about the source notes. I think that is an area that is going to become hot sooner rather than later. So thank you so much. And now we're going to go to Sujata. You also agree that AI is going to have a transformative effect, or is already having a transformative effect.
Yeah, thanks, Taren. I also agree. Even despite the hype, I said yes. Because I think once we go past the hype, I think there's just so much we can do with, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'm going to do that, by using a couple of examples. While it's already helping transform our clinical operations, the COVID pandemic really has accelerated the scaled adoption of these technologies and really encouraged us to challenge ourselves, right? For instance, I'm going to give you a couple of examples here at Novartis. We have something called Sense, which is our control tower, which tracks in real time all of our about more than 500 clinical trials in more than 70 countries at the level of actually individual patients. And it really helped us to keep our operations moving during this pandemic, building on our own expertise and in-source systems and applications to develop such an tool in-house. When the pandemic struck, our data scientists actually collaborated with experts in clinical operations to quickly build a new COVID-19 surveillance, site surveillance tool. In short, we call it COSET. So COSET uses predictive analytics and models based on AI to anticipate where the COVID-19 related disruptions would occur, to then help clinical teams to make informed decisions. And both these tools, Sense and COSET, have really been very helpful in responding proactively to the lockdown, reducing disruption across our portfolio, and supporting our patients. Another example that brings and that I can speak about is to a wealth of scientific and operational knowledge that is embedded in our protocols, right? Too often we do not learn from past experiences and we repeat similar mistakes again and again. And the ultimate outcome could mean the difference between a positive or a neutral trial, right? And so based on this, as a consequence, we launched a new effort, which is called Protocol AI, which empowers the protocol writing process with artificial intelligence by taking advantage of our industry-leading experience. So the goal is really to deliver a more informed, robust, simplified, and optimized future clinical trial study designs, while recognizing that eventually the clinical trial expertise will always play the key role in designing well thought through studies. But we can definitely leverage artificial intelligence to make it a much easier and smoother process. Taren?
Sujata, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing those examples from Novartis where AI is working for you. And one of the questions I wanted to ask the panel, but I ran out of space and time, is about protocol development and the complexity of them. So we can dig into that maybe into our rapid fire or into our Q&A. Suresh, you're up. So tell us about AI.
Thanks to Peter and Aaron and Sujata, they all made a great points already. Last year around this time, when the entire world was looking up to pharma industry, do something to mitigate the risk with the pandemic, we all worked together hard to really stand up and actually come out with something nobody ever understood. We will be able to bring out therapies and vaccines within a year. And we did it. And a lot of unsung heroes behind it. One of them is artificial intelligence. And I would like to walk through one or two examples. My colleagues gave several examples. The one I would like to give you is without mentioning where we had first-hand information, without mentioning sponsor name, I'll say, we had about 45,000 subject study that was going on. And we were processing, deep learning algorithms were processing more than 100 million, close to 200 million clinical data points per day. Okay, this was completely curated by the deep learning algorithms. And sponsor got a little nervous because platform was doing so accurately. They went to regulatory agencies in Europe as well as FDA saying that, can we use this platform? And after a couple of interactions, regulators said, go ahead and do it. And to make long story short here, after last patient, last visit, within 22 hours, we were able to get them a database lock done.
Wow.
And 3 days later, we were able to get a data ready for submission. This is for a really huge subject study. Okay, and that's one of the unsung heroes, I would like to say. People may call it hype, but if you put the mRNA same way, a lot of people said it was a hype. Okay, we put to use artificial intelligence, we put to use during this pandemic, and we came up with therapy as well as vaccine in record time. Nobody ever thought in 5-6 months we'd be able to do it. One more point, if I could say, all the data we collect, I think earlier Peter made a point on this one. I'll just say there's so much deadwood data that we carry around all around. And actually, when we measured it for this vaccine trial, it was less than 0.2% of the data what mattered for safety and efficacy.
Wow.
And algorithms were able to identify that 0.2% of the data. 99.88% of the data you could learn to ignore. Okay, this the kind of thing could be done through deep learning algorithms and artificial intelligence. I'm really proud of the industry was able to deliver this vaccine and therapy in record time. Another point I'll just say is it was not just on the research side, also in manufacturing side. Artificial intelligence was used quite a bit in order to bring the vaccine timely to the market because they had a really small window. They had to bring that vaccine to the market that quickly. And artificial intelligence played a big role there too. So like this, there's not a hype anymore. This is something people have to learn to embed into their thinking.
Suresh, thank you so much. And I think we all agree with you. Kudos to all those unsung heroes out there who moved incredible amounts of data in an incredibly short amount of time to bring us much needed treatments. So thanks to you and your colleagues out there who are working behind the scenes to make that happen. We're going to move to you, Matt, now. You were cautiously optimistic. Is that fair to say in terms of AI's impact?
Yeah, I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I think what you're also hearing from the panel here is the answer is yes, but it depends on the problem you're trying to address, right? I think I've seen teams really struggle when they try to put the technology before the problem, right? So I do a lot of coaching with organizations to try to get them to really strategically focus on what is it we're trying to solve for, how do we figure out the technology that meets that, and how do we create the right outcomes, and I think as long as organizations understand that, they're going to be really, really successful. I think the other point is artificial intelligence and machine learning. These technologies aren't new.
Right.
What they do is the volume, the velocity, the speed of the data that organizations are trying to consume. That's why they're becoming such critical capabilities today. Will they be important? Absolutely. Are they going to make a big impact? Absolutely, they will. It's just you really need to focus on your use cases and how you align your technological strategy to that. So that's why I was a maybe. So.
No, I think those are all great points. Velocity and volume often accelerate any kind of technology that we're looking at, or exasperate what's needed to be still done, or illuminate new pathways forward. Ronan, I'm going to let you take us home on this topic.
But one of the challenges coming last is I think everyone said all the key points that I was going to raise. And just a couple of things, just to bring it back to DCT and operations, because you know, one of the elements here that is evolving very rapidly, and AI can help us, is around some of the regulatory changes. I mean, every day there's somebody, you know, producing a new guideline, a new standard, a new regulation. And so the complexity across 120 countries where we run clinical studies is huge. And so deployment of AI in that space, I think, is a really critical element as we look at DCT. I mean, I agree with all the panelists around the use of data to find, and the use of AI in huge data sets to find patients is absolutely critical, and is going to play into this space and the direct-to-patient recruitment that is part of DCT as well. And then I think probably the last point would be around, and to emphasize, I think Aaron also raised this, that there is a fear that doing decentralized studies might somehow compromise patient data integrity and also safety. And I think using some of the new tools that are out there to look for signal detection, both within the studies and then post-marketing, which is, you know, as Suresh said, 5 to 6 months to develop a vaccine versus 10 years, means there's a huge emphasis on the data collection post-approval. And I think AI can play a big place there in terms of assuring the public around the integrity of the data and the safety.
Excellent. See, you still had something to say, Ronan. It was awesome. You know, I think a big part of all of this too is about the regulatory agencies. So as we went through the pandemic, we looked at what the FDA had allowed, and now we're going to have to see if we'll be able to still continue down that pathway. The same with the EMEA and how those regulatory agencies are going to come together to see what the clear path is for DCTs, going back to that, as well as AI as we move forward. And I use that word hype particularly because I wanted to see, because it was such a big buzzword over the last 18 months or so, everything was AI, everything was machine learning. And so to see that you all are embracing it and how it's being embedded within your organizations and where we can look to for future success is fantastic. So we are now in the home stretch. So Dan, let's launch question number 5.
Okay, Taren. So this is about, we need number 5. There we go. This is about investment. To what degree has your organization changed its investment in new clinical technologies in the past 18 months? Has it increased significantly, increased somewhat, not at all, decreased somewhat, or decreased significantly?
See, to me, this is where the rubber meets the road. So are you all putting your money where your mouth are?
Well, so far it looks like that is the case. So let's give everybody, say, last call and close the poll. And the results are 51% significant increase and 45% somewhat. So it's 96% is up there, Taren.
That's great. So let's see what our super panelists have to say. Flash your cards. We're tracking right along there. Excellent. So, you know, as I said, I think this is where we start to really look at where the investments are being made in terms of your organizations and the sustainability of technology. I think that technology has not become ubiquitous in our industry, but it's those different pieces of the technology and where we're going to find the biggest bangs for the buck. So let's start with you, Aaron. This is a topic that was of interest to you. Let's talk about where you're investing your resources.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, I answered somewhat, and kind of similar to a theme that others have mentioned earlier. You know, we think about the last 18 months, we think about the onset of the pandemic, which really did things to maybe accelerate movements, you know, that were already underway. So from that respect, it hasn't necessarily changed the strategy. It's reinforced some things that we thought 18 months ago have become even more pressing to move forward with. And that means, so specifically to talk about some investments, investing, I would say, I don't think about it only as capital investment, but investing time in the sorts of relationships and capabilities to assemble data from a disparate range of sources. And Ronan, I think, alluded to this earlier as well. When we have a platform and we have the ability to take in data from a lot of different types of avenues, that's how we can advance a DCT. So this kind of comes back to DCT. Because even 18 months ago, we still thought that was the way the world was moving. A lot of studies did incorporate what would you consider one or two elements of that. But so we were making investments to make sure we were positioned for that. We have decided to accelerate and double down in some of those investments. So again, that's why I answered somewhat. So basically the theme is our investments in technology are related to building an infrastructure that can assemble data from disparate sources, harmonize and curate fit for purpose evidence to answer research questions. And it's kind of been that way before, and we're even more committed to that purpose right now.
Excellent. When I had to think back about this question, I should have said technology and technologists, because it's not just the technology, but you're going to need the skilled professionals and to be able to work with the technology, understand what the data are saying, et cetera. So we're going to need a different kind of skilled workforce as we move forward into the future as well. So
agreed. Absolutely. The human resource part is the key part of it. I agree, Taren.
Exactly. So as automated as we get, we still need some people behind some of that stuff. So, which is good to know. So we are now on to our last question. Dan, can you please post poll number 6, which is collaboration?
Absolutely, Taren. Okay, so to what degree has your organization changed its collaboration strategy in the past 18 months? Significantly? Somewhat? Not at all? Has it decreased somewhat or decreased significantly? Lots of answers coming in. So let's say last call. So not surprising again, 90% increased significantly or somewhat.
Excellent. Super panelists, you know what to do by this point, and this is the last time you have to flash. Excellent. I don't think it's any surprise that our panel also unanimously agreed that they have seen an increase in collaboration. I think if COVID has taught us anything, it takes a global village, and we all have to work together to make significant inroads and to create medicines that are so sorely needed for some of the most unmet needs out there right now. So Peter, let's kick off the conversation with you around collaboration.
Yeah, so I really view this question in tandem with the investment. And I think it's been mentioned before that that's really the way you have to think about this. For us in particular, though, there were 2 triggers that changed our attitude towards collaboration. One, which was a simply coincidental one of gaining independence from a larger organization that allowed us to rethink how we approach this. But secondly, and more importantly, the way in which the COVID pandemic altered the way that we deliver our services. So for collaboration to truly deliver value, we've learned to not only tap our broad range of internal subject matter experts, but to look externally to identify where we can better serve the industry by partnering with others. And what we have learned is that partners can be found within the sponsors of trials, obviously, companies providing complementary services and technology. But I don't think we should ignore the fact that sometimes organizations that might otherwise be considered competitors of ours could be good partners to solve a problem. And if we're truly aligned, as I think this panel has demonstrated in all the comments before, in serving our patients, then that is clearly something we need to be open to. Our new independence has allowed us to create the organizational, legal, and operational framework that is needed to facilitate such collaborations. And for such collaborations to be successful, conversations must always start by understanding common goals. And I think realistically, because we're working in this industry with complex relationships, the potential risks or conflicts of interest in such collaborations. Being honest about this early on is critical for collaborations to succeed. The pandemic, I think, has changed our appetite for risk and has allowed us in many cases to be more risk tolerant and to seek approaches that may not have been feasible before. I think this is also true in particular for the attitude of the regulatory agencies. For us, a good example of this is the speed in which COVID vaccination and treatment trials have been launched. In our experience, for example, we saw our IRT services group collaborating very closely with many sponsors and CROs, each looking closely at their SOPs to identify where we could set up processes that could be accelerated in order to spin up trials faster, while at the same time managing the risks and ensuring patient safety. This really wouldn't have been possible without a true collaboration strategy embraced really by all stakeholders in the industry.
Peter, that's excellent. So we're talking frenemies now, right? So you're going to be able to collaborate with some folks that you may not have played in the sandbox with before, which is really the idea behind collaboration, is to move the needle on behalf of patients. It's a big enough pie out there, I think. I'm editorializing, but that's my opinion. Ken, we're going to leave it to you to take us home.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two pieces. I think, to Peter's point, at the beginning of COVID, we launched a 300-site COVID study. All sites were up and running, contracted in 28 days. That has never happened in the last 30 years I've been doing this. And what it proved to us was when you collaborate, when you look, to Peter's point, at all of the SOPs we have created over the last 40 years that don't actually have any connection to regulatory requirements, and you think about contracts, and you think about IRBs, you think about IRTs and databases, we can do better. We showed in COVID, we can do better. And so when you think about the number of months lost where patients could have access to medications, where we could be potentially saving or changing lives just due to process. I mean, the average trial startup is 8, 9, 10, 11 months in some cases. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of patients that are missing access to potentially life-saving drugs because we are not collaborative in our processes. And so I think, if we go backwards, now I don't expect every trial to be up and running in 28 days, but we should have learned enough that we shouldn't slide too far backwards, or, shame on the industry. On the technology side, again, to non-traditional partners, for the last probably year or two, we have really focused on non-traditional collaborations. So instead of sitting in our own industry, working with the Microsofts and Googles and Apples of the world, really going out to people that know nothing about clinical research and sharing our models and asking for their input on design. And I'll tell you what, if you want a gut check on how we do things in the pharma industry, sit down with a bunch of 25-year-olds at Google and explain the drug development process to them. And they just look at you like you're insane. Like, I can remember one of the questions, like, you purposely did that. You purposely created that model. And I was like, we totally did, right? And that's how we run trials. But to get their input, right? To get completely non-traditional input into how we do this model, I think is fantastic. And so we are looking at unconventional bedfellows to help us rethink this model that we have created. And that collaboration has been fantastic. Some of the ideas are crazy, but I would argue some of our traditional models are also crazy. So as we move towards these pieces, as we move towards AI and ML partners, and we think about eSource, and we think about non-traditional models on how we collect data, and we think about Suresh's, comment about collecting, millions of data points and closing out a database in under a day or two. I mean, those things didn't exist without collaboration. And so I really do think that we are going to have to continue down this collaboration model outside of our industry to really move us forward.
I think that's a really important point you bring up, is about that design element and how we look at the industry from outside of the industry, and really taking a hard look at what we do in terms of our processes and being honest about it and saying, not working so well anymore, and we really do need to change. And COVID has given us this opportunity to go to this next frontier. Everybody talks about the next normal. For a year and a half or last year or so, I've been saying, why be normal when the industry has the opportunity to be extraordinary? And this is really the opportunity to take some extraordinary leaps and take some of those calculated risks. As you said earlier, that we are now a little bit less risk averse. So I will stop there, and I will say thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to all of our audience for your comments during this first part of the program. We are now going to move to our rapid fire. And I'm going to ask each one of the panelists in alphabetical order, because that's how my brain works, to give me their 30-second prediction on where they see the industry going in a post-COVID world. And we're going to start with you, Aaron. Go.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just build upon the last two questions, investment and collaboration. I do see those as intertwined as well. And I see that in a post-COVID world, the collaboration becomes even more important. And I'll make this real with an example. In the very beginning, Kent brought up an example where we can avoid the cost and time associated with enrolling placebo control arms. In order to do that, we need to be able to find those patient populations, often rare diseases, in structured and unstructured data. We may need to collaborate with a firm that is specializing in MLP that can apply those algorithms to the unstructured data and parse out those patient populations. We need to get the data perhaps from a large EMR provider like a Cerner, and then we need somebody in the middle to assemble all the data together and produce fit for purpose outputs. In this case, a synthetic control arm that can be compared against the active control arm. So you see a lot of different stakeholders across the landscape coming together there to do something that is going to ultimately bring medicines to market faster. And that's the way we see as the way forward.
It's exciting, Rob. Thank you so much. We are now going to move to Ronan.
I'll keep it very, very brief. I think decentralized studies are going to be, they're here to stay. We're not going to be moving back to traditional models. The one thing we have to work on as an industry is building the ROI arguments around it in terms of the data, how effective they are, what the impact is, because that's every question I ever get is like, sounds great, but what are the trade-offs in terms of cost? And we've all talked about the impact on patients and burden, but we need to prove it.
Excellent. And Rob, we're going to go to you because I don't want the audience to think I don't know how to alphabetize. I just have old eyes. So, Rob, go ahead. Turn.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm hoping that we harness the energy of clinical trial participation overall, right? One thing that COVID has taught us, that there is general interest by the global population to be a part of clinical trials. We want to harness that going forward to increase participation overall across all diseases. That's really critical for us. Right. Number two, I think we're going to see continued very rapid evolution of technologies that support a patient's journey through a clinical trial, right? From identification to enrollment to retention to wearables, which is really exciting for us. We want to make sure the momentum that we built around COVID continues to accelerate, and we see sponsors and CROs and sites continue to push on the adoption of these technologies. And number three, really continue to push forward with collaboration. There's still not a lot of synergy between the data and partnerships between companies that exist in the e-clinical space overall. We have big companies like the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Microsoft that have figured out how to coexist and have data play with one another really well, very easily. And we need to move forward with these collaborations. I think that's a trend that we're seeing increase, but still a long ways to go. We don't have an appropriate framework, standardization of data. There's just some big lists that need to exist in the industry that we're only partially there, but we're seeing progress. And I personally want to see that progress continue, but more rapidly.
Excellent. So there's optimism. Claire?
I think ultimately, Taren, the current global research infrastructure does not support the needs that we have in terms of the volume of research we need to do. So we absolutely have to adopt new methodologies and technologies. And I think we will continue to do that, as you can see, but I would like to leave a sort of action point for all our attendees, which is please empower your teams to make decisions to adopt some of these new technologies and methodologies. It's great to talk about it at the senior management levels, but until your teams are empowered to make decisions to adopt them, we will struggle to adopt as an industry. So I'm just going to put that final piece out as well.
I love that. That's great. Wendy, I'm going to turn to you.
Thanks, Taren. So our corporate imperative was just refreshed, and one of them was like unleash the power of data and digital. As scientific and digital innovation are accelerating rapidly, they offer enormous opportunities to add value for patients, our employees, and society. This imperative is fundamental to making us more data-driven and outcomes-based to realize our purpose. We believe that our people, not technology alone, are what will make the difference in our data and digital journey.
Excellent. I love the unleash the power of data. I think we've been hearing that for the last hour or so. So fantastic. Suresh, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Taren. Look, post-pandemic, it kind of taught us we are going through a transformative journey right now. And that's how we achieved what we achieved over last 12 months. And I'm hoping that that's here to stay. This digital transformation is here to stay. There are many different ways to, already some of them are answered here, whether it's a data or it's a process or it's a mindset. A lot of things have to come together at this point. One thing I'll say from Jeffrey Moore point is early adapters now widely believe in this industry now, they cannot afford to not to leverage technology anymore. Okay, that belief is coming through, at least in this panel, I see that quite well, and it's reflective of how the industry is thinking about it.
Thank you so much. That's great. Matt, you are up.
All right, so I think I'll keep it simple, and I mentioned this already at the beginning of the call. The consumerization of healthcare, in my view, will continue, and that will make the convergence of health and tech, vital to the healthcare model of the future. And I think organizations that will be successful will develop the right strategic capabilities to enable them to be successful in a world that looks like that.
Wonderful. Caroline?
Yeah, I see a huge focus on the patient, even new titles in our industry, a lot happening around the patient. And so I think there'll be a huge focus on making sure they understand what opportunities are out there, that their journey is what they would like it to be, as easy as possible, and we're able to engage them. But I also think the other stakeholders are going to be really important. Pharma, from the way we design trials and how we include that up front, so we're not doing the rework later, how the sites need to change how their processes work to accommodate these, or maybe we've identified new sites with diverse populations that we help get into clinical trials. And then the regulatory agencies, if they're not part of this and they're not supporting it, nobody's doing it. So how do we make sure that that all comes together?
Fantastic. Thank you. John, you are now up. You're on mute, John.
Another rookie mistake.
It
happens, right?
So I understand.
Yeah. Well, we've certainly spent some time talking about the consumerization of healthcare. And I think we're starting to see the emergence as the patient or their caregivers or their parents, in the case of rare disease, as the CEO of their diagnostic and treatment journey. And so what I think you're going to start to see this year is a real focus on how do we engage and activate those patients? How do we combine the data science with the behavioral science, and even the communication science, and allow them to consume information about disease intercept or therapies or clinical trials in an omni-channel manner. So I think it's all about that communication facet and being able to communicate in the language of those patients and where they want to see that communication occur.
Fantastic. There's an interesting couple of points there that we hadn't heard from before. So I love that idea of thinking about the patient journey and bringing the caregivers into it, because a patient does not stand alone in most cases. So we need to think about that as well. Peter?
Yeah, I think Caroline also brought up a point that's important to me. I think we have to recognize all of the constituencies involved in all of this, right? And we've learned how to run decentralized trials, sort of in essence, in various degrees over the past 18 months. But we need to understand the decentralized world across all different constituencies: the patients, the investigators, the sponsors, the service providers, and the regulatory agencies. But at the same time, I think we need to start to learn how to reintroduce the power of live interaction. We all believe in technology, but technology can become a little unpersonal at times. And so thinking about what we might have lost may also be important, and trying to understand what that is and reintroducing some of it judiciously, that's a big priority for us too.
I love that. Yes, we'd love to be live again, wouldn't we? Even though this is great technology to bring us all together. Kent? You're on mute, my friend.
There we go. I think, first of all, I mean, I agree with everybody. If I could take all of you with me to all of my meetings with sponsors, it would be more powerful. But I mean, I think that, you know, to Matt's point and John's point, there is going to be this point in time where consumer healthcare merges with R&D. And to Claire's earlier point, we have got to stop thinking about these patients as unicorns. They are not unique. They are consuming healthcare like everything else they do. And so this desire to push people out of a digital engagement with their consumer healthcare into an analog engagement for drug development clinical trials just doesn't make any sense. And I think, you know, to John's point, if you think about the marketing side of pharma and biotech, those departments know everything about how those patients behave. We don't take any of that information into the trial side. We just assume that patients will participate in whatever design we set forward, ignoring everything we know on the commercial side about those consumer behaviors in their healthcare environment. And then finally, when you think about, you know, Ronan's point about ROI and costs, you know, I remember a conversation with a very large pharma client arguing around a $2 million price tag for a mobile platform for this trial that we thought would be significantly impactful to recruitment. And the guy at the table said, you know, our marketing department just spent $1 million to determine what color the clothes should be in our advertisements that are going forward that be most appealing to that consumer group. He's like, if we can spend $1 million to determine red was the right color for a sweater in our TV ads, I mean, our priorities are in the wrong place. And so we have all of these tools. We have all this ability. And I think, you know, post-COVID, when we saw how many patient lives we can actually save when we put our minds to the test, I just don't think we can go backwards. And I think all of these components are going to be a critical path forward. We just have to help remind people around what the priority is, right? And the reason we have chief patient officers today, which didn't exist 2 years, 3, 4 years ago, is because I think we are moving towards that mindset. But it's all of those pieces, you know, it's data science and machine learning and consumer health and all these pieces that have to come together to make that happen. And it's making sure that all the folks on calls like this are, you know, out there evangelizing this comprehensive message to everybody all the time.
Thank you, Kent. That was great. And Sujata, you are in the unenviable position of being last, but I know you're up to it. So.
Thank you, Taren. You know, I'm going to bring it all back to patients. You know, we've always said at Novartis, reimagine how you bring medicines to patients. So really the pandemic has accelerated and pandemic and the accelerated adoption of all these digital technologies has enabled us to engage with patients very, very differently and to reach, you know, even more patients than ever before. However, at the same time, we also need to remember that as the old framework didn't work for everyone, neither will a fully digital or remote framework. So really for us to be able to, you know, find that balance, you know, not adopting technology advancements for the sake of it, but really focusing on where they can add the most value and where it matters the most, so we can get medicines into the hands of patients who need it the most. So I think really finding that right balance and getting that patient perspective, because they are the central to all of this. So I think that's my thinking. Back to you, Tara.
Thank you so much. You know, I took a couple of things out of this panel. Obviously, we all know that drug development is incredibly complex. And to boil it down to a 90-minute session seems crazy. But you all did such a wonderful job in bringing out some key themes. We need to think about our patients as people and as consumers who want to participate in clinical trials as they do the rest of their lives. We need more evangelists out there who are promoting the idea of collaboration and crossing borders and thinking about non-traditional partners. We need to think about data, and we need to think about that we are a people industry as well. So as much as technology is going to move us forward, we still have to go back to who we are as an industry. And it's about people doing good work for people and being live with each other and being honest and being transparent with each other and working hand in hand. As we saw what happened through the COVID pandemic, and look at what the industry was able to achieve. So kudos to all of you who are playing such a crucial part in moving the industry forward and making us more tech-enabled in order to meet the challenges that lie ahead and address where we need to go in bringing those drugs to patients. So thank you to all of our super panelists. Thank you to our audience for participating in this part of the program. And now we're going to turn it over to our audience and we're going to have our Q&A. And as we go over to our Q&A, I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors: Advanced Clinical, Calyx, ClinOne, IQVIA, Parexel, PRA Health Sciences, Real Chemistry, Saama Technologies, and UBC. Thank you so much for bringing our vision of our super panel to life. Dan, let's go to our Q&A if you can. Oh, and
all right, Taren, we've got a lot of great questions in here. I would say let's go with the first question, and this is assigned to our three sponsor organizations, Sage, Takeda, and Novartis. What do you see as the biggest opportunity for improvement in clinical trials, and what steps have you taken or would like to take to reduce cycle times, mitigate risk, and improve quality? Who wants to tackle that one? You just raise your hand.
Sujata,
Okay,
all you.
Since I have to sign off in a few minutes, I thought I'll raise my hand first and answer the question. So I think, I shared a few examples. I think in the pandemic, we all went through a process of repurposing medicines and, figuring out what makes sense. And we were really able to pull through putting protocols together, launching trials in such short periods of time. And then we did like an inside out view of it to see what is it that made us work so fast. And some of it is just the bureaucracy that we have within an organization, right? Silos that we work towards. And when we really empower our people, then we found like amazing things, not even technology. We didn't need a lot of technology. A lot of other, just things could help us out. But again, also leveraging the technology that we have to really identifying sites where we have recruitment issues, sites where things are going well, really being able to target that. It was like having an airport, cockpit for a pilot to be able to see where is the problem and really tackle those. So really leveraging technology where it works, leveraging our associates and empowering them where it works, and really having that bridge between the two is probably the best way for us to get there. And I'm sure we can if we work on it.
Fantastic. We are rapidly running out of time. So Dan, one more quick question maybe?
Okay, well, this is an interesting one. What are your thoughts on how can we apply learnings from other industries around the use of technology? And what are some of the challenges in adopting some of those technologies? Are you seeing other technologies from elsewhere that we could bring in here? Raise your hand if you want to tackle that one.
Well, I think Kent addressed some of those earlier with going to Amazon and the Googles. And go ahead, Suresh.
Look, I know that we are running out of time here, but all that I'll say, as I mentioned earlier, already, there are quite a bit of technologies that have been leveraged from other industries, and also collaboration. People mentioned about it. And in technology industry, we have figured out how to co-live and coexist, sharing the data. And that has to be done really quickly. Clinical research has to be shared. Every one of us do not need to start from ground zero every time. That's what is happening. There are a bunch of things about people have already spoken today. We are still at 3 to 5% ability to identify a patient for clinical trials. That's really very disappointing, even in 2022. Whereas other industries have figured out who you are and what you want, when you want, where you want, all that stuff. But we are not able to figure that out in this industry. Like this, these are all already proven technologies in other industries. There's no reason for us not to use that one. Recruitment of the patient, it just can be done. I know that many people say that it's complex, but complex problems have been solved in the other industries. And let's look at those technologies to bring them here.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I want to thank again, we are almost out of time. So I want to hand it back to Dan. But before I do, I want to say a sincere thanks to our super panelists for your time and your energy around this program and for your tremendous insights. Dan, all you.
Thank you, Taren. Well, I hope everybody benefited from this event and have taken away some new insights. I know that I sure have. If any of your colleagues missed this presentation, or if you want to see it again, it will be available as a recording within about 2 business days, and you will be notified via email. On behalf of the PharmaVOICE family, thank you again to our panelists, our audience, and our generous sponsors who made this event possible. Advanced Clinical, Calyx, ClinOne, IQVIA, Parexel, PRA Health Sciences, Real Chemistry, Saama Technologies, and UBC. I'd also like to encourage you to consider our numerous past and upcoming web seminars and panels by visiting pharmavoice.com. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Wendy, you can finally get some sleep in Japan. The event is now over.
Thank you all so much.